Hi, my name is Roxy Nelson, and oh my God, so I don't- excuse me. Hi, my name is Roxy Nelson, and my presentation will be on morphine today. So first of all, what is morphine? Well, it's a drug, an analgesic, that is used to treat patients with chronic pain or just very severe pain in general, from either surgeries or just extensive injury that they may have suffered. It is in the drug class analgesic opioid agonist, and an opioid is a classification of drug that relieves pain by binding to opioid receptors within the brain as well as the spinal cord. An analgesic is a term for a pain reliever, but less harsh than opioids. Analgesics can relieve the pain without making the individual go unconscious, which the dosaging has to be correct for that to happen. The morphine itself is a narcotic ingredient in opium that became isolated from opium in 1803. Agonist is a chemical that works to activate certain receptors to elicit a biological response. So the history. The opium poppy was first cultivated in Mesopotamia around 3400 BC, which the Sumerians used it for many medicinal purposes such as pain relief, anesthesia, calming crying children, sleeping, and recreational uses as well. So we see some kind of addiction there. The first actual isolated pure morphine was produced by a German scientist, Friedrich Serturner, in 1803. Once isolated, morphine became the top pain relief medication in the Civil War, and soon thousands of soldiers became addicted to this drug since they didn't really understand the addictive properties. It's just like, oh, like this is a great pain reliever, and they didn't really try to, I guess, manipulate it that much. I had a little fun fact that morphine is one of the oldest drugs that we know of today. This is just more of the history on how I isolated it. So Sir Turner isolated this active ingredient in opium by first figuring out how to isolate the poppy acid within opium. In his experiments, he figured out that the substance was soluble in acid water, and when he added ammonium to opium, there was precipitates that were crystallized that were also colorless that had formed, which he named morphium after the Greek god of dreams, Morpheus, which he then first tested this powder on rats, dogs, cats, and mice to test if it was toxic or fatal at all. And then once his trials were successful, he tested it on himself with different levels of dosaging, and then also on 3 human test subjects with different levels of the dosaging just to see how the effects worked and how if there was like an overdose, it could lead to death or other things. So then from these trials, he learned that the correct dosage of what was safe to ingest or to be injected with for humans was to alleviate pain without producing the negative symptoms of slightly overdosing. Then once he isolated it, morphine became the top pain relieving medication of the Civil Wars. And then again, like these soldiers became addicted because they didn't really understand like properties yet or how it would affect them in the long run. There's a little bit more history. After they discovered the addictive qualities, they began to experiment to create a new pain relieving drug that was less addictive because they weren't sure how to control it. And so morphine became like pure morphine became the baseline for all other opioids synthesized from the base of morphine, such as like heroin and others. So to try and create a less addictive painkiller, they first used morphine as a base along with other chemicals and synthesized heroin, which was right after morphine. This unfortunately proved to be more potent and addictive than morphine, which scientists didn't know at the time, but soon came later to figure out. Regulation of morphine. Doctors are advised to not give out opioids as the first option for a patient's treatment. If necessary, doctors will prescribe the lowest dosage at first to prevent addiction from happening. And then I found this quote from a CDC website where the goal of the new guidance is judicious opioid prescribing with an emphasis on alternative medications for pain. So basically, they want to give you a bunch of different options for treatment, like pain relieving treatments, so then it has different areas to attack the pain altogether instead of just one heavy dose of something. So scientists and doctors are hopeful that alternative pain relief treatments and the use of opioids combined will reduce pain more than just opioids or just the alternative pain relief treatments. So this is the mechanism of action. So first, morphine has a high affinity for delta, kappa, and mu opioid receptors. Having a high affinity means that morphine is likely to react with these receptors. Delta, kappa, and mu opioid receptors are key receptors in pain relief, which is why this is where they kind of bind to. These receptors are also G-coupled receptors, which means that once morphine binds to it, the receptors can now allow the G protein to bind to the receptor, and thus the receptor is activated. These receptors are mainly located in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord, which I put an image in the top right corner. These receptors are they're also throughout various regions within the brain, as well as spinal cord. Once morphine binds to the receptors, this then inhibits nociceptive signals, which these signals rely to the brain if there are damaging stimuli to any part of the body. Essentially, the morphine will block the body and brain from feeling or paying attention to the pain. Extracting morphine. To create the morphine base, you first have to boil raw opium, which gives you that opium liquid like the poppy acid. Any potential impurities or chunks will float to the top to be scraped out to purify further. I got this quote also from a different website that I referenced later below. Slake lime, which is calcium hydroxide, is then added to the liquid so that the morphine alkaloid reacts with the lime to form a solution. The solution is then poured through a filter to remove any impurities, such as other alkaloids, that may have sunk to the bottom. Concentrated ammonia is added to the solution and is then reheated. The morphine solidifies and settles at the bottom of the pot, which then we can filter out these chunks since the rest of it is just liquid. As mentioned before with Sartorno's experiments, ammonia produces the white precipitate that is known as morphine, which is how we get the powder and the precipitate. For intravenous medical use, you first have to dilute morphine with a diluent. For oral ingestion, there are capsules patients can take, which when I did this research, I didn't know that there were capsules. That was kind of cool to learn. These are just like some physical aspects that I found, like dependence and stuff. So the physical dependence is a result of long-term abuse of this drug. Long-term abuse leads to neuroadaptive changes within the central nervous system. The neurochemistry of the brain becomes altered by the morphine's influence. The brain is an adaptive organ and can change with heavily induced adaptations such as drug abuse. Neuroplasticity describes how our brain changes and adapts through our life experience as drug abuse contributes to this. Chronic drug abuse alters the brain and makes us dependent on that drug. So when morphine binds to those receptors, it ultimately adapts those receptors. So it's your tolerance gets built up, and then your brain basically needs it to feel that certain way again. We also got this other quote, achieved via activation of mu opioid receptors located on GABA neurons within the VTA, which play an important role in regulating the activity of VTA dopamine hormones, or neurons, my bad. Dopamine gets flooded into the brain, making us feel happy and pleasure. Addiction causes the brain to rely on morphine to feel good, and with long-term abuse, the brain becomes used to feeling a certain way. Thus, pathways within the brain and dependence have been set, bypassing the natural reward pathway and creating a new shortcut pathway to feeling good. So basically, the natural way gets kind of like repaved by what morphine does to your brain. And then I added this little GIF in to show like what kind of it does to your brain. So you see that there's normal activity with natural endorphins that we need throughout the day, and then the opioid users, they have a bunch of these drugs that basically bind, there's more receptors, so they bind to these and then ultimately change it, which then our brain needs to kind of feel good with them. So withdrawal. Withdrawal is when your body and brain start to detox from that drug. So these are some early symptoms such as like headache, body aches, chills, sweat, a runny nose, which can be closely correlated to the symptoms of the common flu. But then late physical symptoms are like increased heart rate, blood pressure, tremors, cravings, cramping, insomnia, chills, and in some severe cases, they can be fatal. There's definitely many mental symptoms such as like increased irritability, anger, agitation, depression, anxiety, and memory loss in some cases. Since you become so dependent, once you come down off that high, it's like craving it, so you get kind of cranky and irritated. That's like I think where all those mental symptoms come in. Most of the time, doctors will try and wean the patient off of morphine by using other drugs, kind of non-addictive ones, to ease the symptoms of withdrawal and make it easier transition for the patient. And here's a list of my references. And then that's all I had today. So thank you so much for listening.